The house stood tall and shining at the end of a quiet street, like a palace made of stone and glass. From the outside, it looked perfect. Wide gates, clean white walls, trim gardens, and windows that reflected the sun like mirrors. People passing by often slowed their steps, admiring its beauty. Some even whispered that only lucky people live there. But inside those walls, the air felt heavy. Every morning before sunrise, the maids gathered silently in the back corridor. Their footsteps were soft, their heads lowered. No one laughed. No one spoke unless it was needed. Even the sound of bangles or shoes was avoided, as if noise itself could invite trouble. Their faces showed tired eyes and forced calm, hiding fear behind practiced obedience. Each maid knew the rules well. Beds had to be made without a single wrinkle. Floors had to shine like mirrors. Tea had to be warm, not hot, not cold, perfect. A small mistake could ruin the day. Sometimes, even perfection was not enough. Because this was her house. The madam ruled it with cold eyes and a sharp voice. Her presence was felt even when she was not in the room. A glance from her could freeze blood. A word from her could break confidence built over years. She believed fear was the best way to control people. Kindness, in her eyes, made workers lazy. Respect, she thought, had to be forced. Maids whispered stories when they were alone. Stories of women who had cried in the storage room. Women who were fired without warning. Women who left with shaking hands and broken hope. Some had begged. Some had fainted. None had ever changed her heart. This house had seen many faces come and go. As the day moved forward, the maids worked like shadows. Cleaning, washing, cooking, serving, always alert, always tense. Their hearts beat fast at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. A call from the madam could mean anything: a sharp insult, a harsh punishment, or sudden dismissal. By evening, their bodies ached, but rest never came easy. Fear followed them like a shadow. Even in silence, their minds replayed the day's mistakes again and again. The house was beautiful, but it was not warm. It was rich, but it was not kind. And yet, beneath all this fear, something strange was beginning to form. A small feeling, a quiet shift. No one spoke of it. No one dared to name it. But deep inside, among tired hearts and bowed heads, there was a sense that this routine could not last forever. That one day, something or someone would change the silence. The house had broken many women before, but it did not know that soon a story would begin within its walls. A story that would shake its power, soften a hardened heart, and change everything forever. When the madam entered a room, the air changed. Her steps were firm and measured, echoing softly against the marble floor. She did not rush, and she never hesitated. Her straight posture and sharp eyes made it clear. This house moved according to her will. The maids felt her presence even before they saw her. Shoulders stiffened, hands trembled, hearts beat faster. She watched everything. A crooked curtain, a misplaced cup, a slow response. Nothing escaped her notice. Her discipline was strict, almost cruel. She believed order was the only way to survive in the world. Mistakes, in her eyes, were signs of weakness. And weakness was something she despised. Kindness was not part of her rules. To her, kindness spoiled people. It made them careless. It gave them courage to disobey. So she chose control instead. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were sharp and cold. Each sentence carried weight and often pain. The maids learned quickly that silence was safer than explanation. But behind this hard shell lived a woman who spent most of her time alone. At night, after the house grew quiet, the madam sat in her large bedroom, surrounded by expensive furniture and soft lights. Everything she owned spoke of wealth and power. Yet the room felt empty. The silence pressed in on her, louder than any noise during the day. She rarely spoke to her family. Old misunderstandings and bitter memories had built walls too high to cross. Friends had slowly drifted away, unable to understand her anger or match her control. Trust did not come easy to her. In fact, it did not come at all. So she chose distance. Distance from her staff. Distance from her past. Distance from her own heart. Sometimes she stood by the window, staring into the dark garden below. Her face remained calm, but her eyes told a different story. They held old pain, pain she never spoke about, pain she had buried deep inside. Long ago, she had trusted someone completely. She had believed in promises, in loyalty, in love. And that trust had been broken, betrayed in a way that left scars she never allowed to heal. From that day, she decided one thing: never depend on anyone again. Power became her shield. Control became her safety. The maids did not know this story. They only saw the anger, the harsh rules, the cold punishments. They did not see the sleepless nights or the quiet moments when her strong face softened for just a second. Still, her pain did not excuse her cruelty. Each day, she pushed others away, believing it kept her safe. Each harsh word built her walls higher, and each fearful face around her reminded her that she was alone, even in a house full of people. Yet, beneath her strict ways, something fragile remained, a wound that never closed, a heart that had learned to survive by becoming hard. And unknowingly, the madam was walking toward a moment she could not control, a moment that would force her to face the pain she had spent years hiding. Because soon, someone would step into her life who did not fear her power and did not break under her cruelty. And that quiet strength would begin to crack the armor she believed was unbreakable. Before sunrise, when the city still slept, the maids of the house were already awake. Their days began long before the gates opened and ended long after the lights were turned off. Each woman carried her own burden into the kitchen, the halls, and the silent rooms. Their hands worked together, but their hearts were heavy with private pain. There was Asha, whose fingers shook every time she washed dishes. Not from weakness, but from worry. Her mother lay sick at home, waiting for medicine that Asha could barely afford. Every missed day of work meant less food, fewer pills, and more fear. She swallowed insults quietly because she could not afford to lose this job. Then there was Mina, who cleaned the bedrooms with red eyes and a tired smile. Her husband had left years ago, disappearing without a word. 2 children waited for her each night in a small rented room. Their school fees, their meals, their future, all rested on her tired shoulders. When the madam shouted at her, Mina lowered her head and said nothing. Pride did not feed children. Money did. Another maid, older than the rest, moved slowly through the halls. Her back ached, but she never complained. She had worked in many houses, and each time, she was replaced by someone younger, cheaper, stronger. This house was her last hope. Every threat of firing felt like a death sentence. Humiliation was part of their routine, a raised voice in front of others, accusations without proof, blame for mistakes they did not make. Sometimes, even their silence angered the madam. They were scolded for being slow, for being quiet, for being human. Each insult took something from them: their dignity, their confidence, their belief that they mattered. Yet, none of them walked away, because outside these walls waited hunger, debt, and uncertainty. Inside, there was pain, but also a paycheck. Fear of unemployment chained them stronger than any lock. Losing respect hurt, but losing work could destroy lives. In the small moments they stole for themselves, the maids shared quiet glances. A nod in the hallway, a gentle touch on the arm, a shared cup of water in the corner of the kitchen. No words were needed. They understood each other's pain. This was their unspoken bond. They never talked about fighting back. Hope felt dangerous here. Complaints led nowhere. Courage was punished. So they survived the only way they knew how, together but silent. At night, when the house slept, their thoughts wandered far beyond these walls. Asha imagined her mother smiling again. Mina pictured her children finishing school. The older maid dreamed of resting one day without fear. But morning always came too soon, pulling them back into the same routine, the same fear, the same humiliation. The cruelty of the house did not end at its gates. It followed them home, into sick rooms, into empty kitchens, into hungry nights and restless sleep. Every harsh word echoed long after the madam's voice faded. And still, they returned the next day. Because survival demanded sacrifice. Because desperation crushed dignity. Yet, As broken as they felt, something still lived inside them, a quiet strength passed from one tired heart to another. A strength that said, "Endure one more day." None of them knew it yet, but among their shared suffering, change was slowly approaching. A new presence would soon enter their world, one that would see their pain, one that would not look away, and one whose story would begin to shift the balance they believed could never change. Their dreams were broken, but they were not gone. The morning the new maid arrived, nothing seemed different at first. The house stood as cold and grand as always. The maids moved through their routines with the same careful steps, the same lowered eyes. Fear still lived in the walls. Yet, quietly, something new entered with the sound of the back gate opening. She was young, but not weak. Her clothes were simple and clean, her hair neatly tied back. She carried no jewelry, no confidence on her face, only calm. Her eyes moved slowly, taking in every corner of the house without curiosity or fear. She did not speak unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice was soft but steady. The other maids noticed her at once. They expected the usual signs: nervous hands, quick apologies, anxious smiles. New maids always arrived with hope and left with tears. But this one was different. She worked quietly, learned quickly, and never reacted when the madam's sharp voice cut through the air. When she was corrected harshly, she simply nodded and continued. When she was blamed unfairly, she lowered her eyes but did not tremble. Her calm made the others uneasy, not because they feared her, but because they did not understand her. How could someone remain so peaceful in a house built on fear? How could she stand so straight under words meant to break her? The madam noticed too. At first, it was only a glance. A longer pause while watching the new maid clean the table. A slight frown when her harsh words did not cause tears or panic. The madam was used to control. She expected fear, and when fear did not appear, it unsettled her. The new maid never argued, never explained, never begged. She listened, and she observed. She saw the madam's anger rise suddenly and fall just as fast. She noticed how the madam avoided sitting with others, how she stayed alone even in crowded rooms. She saw how her eyes hardened during the day, but looked tired at night. This maid had known pain before. Deep pain. Pain that teaches silence instead of noise. Strength instead of rage. Though she never spoke of her past, her actions hinted at it. She moved carefully, as if protecting old wounds. She accepted cruelty not because she believed she deserved it, but because she had learned that reacting often made pain worse. Yet something inside her remained alive, a quiet sense of empathy. When another maid was scolded, the new maid stayed close after, offering silent support. A glass of water, a shared moment of calm. No words, just presence. The madam saw this too. She did not like it. Something about the new maid's eyes disturbed her. They did not look at her with hatred. They did not look at her with fear. Instead, they looked at her as if she were human, as if her anger hid something broken. No one had ever looked at her that way, and that was dangerous, because for the first time in years, the madam felt seen, not as a ruler, but as a wounded soul hiding behind control. The new maid did not know it yet, but her quiet strength had already begun to shake the balance of the house. She had entered without noise, without challenge, and still, her presence whispered a powerful truth. Not all strength is loud, and sometimes, the calmest hearts carry the deepest storms. As the days passed, it became clear. This maid was not here by accident. She was the beginning of change. The change began quietly, almost unnoticed. The madam started watching the quiet maid more closely than the others. Her eyes followed every movement, every step, every pause. At first, it seemed like simple supervision, but soon it became something else, focused, sharp, and personal. Small mistakes were no longer ignored. A cup placed slightly off the tray. A towel folded a second too late. A door closed a little louder than usual. Each tiny thing became a reason for punishment. The madam's voice grew louder when calling her name, cutting through the house like a blade. And always, it happened in front of others. The quiet maid stood still as the harsh words fell on her. Her face remained calm, her eyes lowered. She did not defend herself. She did not cry. She did not argue. She listened, accepted, and returned to her work. The other maids watched in fear. They whispered among themselves in the kitchen corners and storage rooms. They were sure the quiet maid would not last. No one ever did. The madam always broke them in the end. Some quit. Some were fired. Some left in tears. They expected her breaking point to come any day. But it didn't. The punishments grew heavier. She was given the hardest tasks. Extra cleaning. Long hours without rest. Blame for things she had not done. If something went missing, her name was spoken first. If something went wrong, her face was called forward. Still, she endured. Her hands grew rough. Her back ached. At night, she lay awake in the small staff room, staring at the ceiling, breathing slowly to calm the storm inside her chest. Pain was not new to her. She had learned long ago how to carry it without showing its weight. The madam did not understand this. Each day, her anger grew stronger. The quiet maid's silence felt like disrespect. Her patience felt like challenge. The madam wanted fear. She wanted tears. She wanted proof of control. But all she received was calm obedience. This unsettled her deeply. The house began to feel tighter, heavier. The other maids moved carefully around the quiet maid, afraid her suffering would fall on them too. Some tried to warn her in whispers, telling her to speak up, to apologize more, to stay invisible. She only smiled faintly, not because she was unafraid, but because she had faced worse. The audience, watching her silent endurance, begins to wonder, why doesn't she fight back? Why doesn't she leave like the others? What pain could be so heavy that this cruelty feels small in comparison? The madam pushed harder. One evening, she accused the quiet maid of a serious mistake she did not make. The punishment was harsh and public. The room fell silent. The other maids held their breath, waiting for the quiet maid to finally protest. She didn't. She accepted the blame with a steady heart and bowed her head. In that moment, something changed. The madam saw it in her eyes, not fear, not defeat, but strength. A strength built from survival. A strength that did not shout or fight, but refused to break. For the first time, the madam felt uncertain. Her cruelty had reached its peak, yet had not won. And the quiet maid, standing silently under injustice, had become the center of the house's tension. No one knew it yet, but this silent battle was moving toward a breaking point. And soon, something would happen that neither of them could ignore. An incident that would force truth into the open and turn endurance into action. The storm was building. The storm finally broke on a day that began like any other. The house woke to the sound of hurried footsteps and sharp orders. The madam was already angry. Something small had gone wrong in the morning, and like always, her temper spread through the halls like fire. The maids felt it at once. Their hands moved faster. Their hearts beat harder. Fear filled the air. In her rush, the madam demanded everything be done at once. She gave orders without care, without listening, without thinking. The house moved under pressure, each maid trying to stay invisible. But pressure creates cracks. In the back corridor, near the storage stairs, an elderly helper, old and weak, was carrying a heavy bucket. Her hands trembled. She had asked earlier to rest, but the madam's anger had allowed no mercy. Work came before weakness. No one noticed when her foot slipped. The bucket crashed. Water spilled across the floor, spreading fast and slick. Before anyone could react, the old woman lost her balance and fell hard. Her cry echoed through the corridor, sharp, helpless, full of pain. The maids froze. Fear held them in place. Helping her meant drawing attention. Drawing attention meant blame. And blame meant punishment. The madam's footsteps were already approaching. Except one person did not freeze. The quiet maid dropped what she was doing and ran forward. Without thinking of herself, without fear of consequence, she knelt beside the fallen woman. Her hands were steady as she lifted her head, speaking softly, checking for injury. The madam arrived in a flash of anger. She saw the spilled water. She saw the mess. Her voice rose instantly, sharp and accusing. She was ready to punish, ready to shout, to blame, to fire if needed. But then she saw the quiet maid. She saw her shielding the old woman with her body. She saw her using her own clothes to stop the bleeding. She saw her eyes filled not with fear, but with concern. "Please," the quiet maid said softly, her voice calm but firm. "She needs help." That single moment changed everything. The madam had expected excuses. She had expected begging. She had expected silence. She had not expected compassion. The house stood still. The maids watched with wide eyes, expecting anger to explode even more. Helping without permission was a crime here. Speaking without fear was unheard of, but the quiet maid did not move. Even when the madam's gaze fell on her, cold and sharp, she stayed where she was. She risked punishment. She risked losing her job. She risked everything for someone weaker than herself. The old woman clutched her hand, shaking, tears rolling down her face. And for the first time, the madam hesitated. Something about the scene pierced her anger. The quiet maid's hands reminded her of something buried deep in her memory. Long ago, when someone had protected her in the same way. A memory she had locked away with her pain. Her voice faltered. The madam ordered help, but the words came slower than usual. The tone was different, less sharp, almost unsure. As the injured woman was taken away, the quiet maid remained behind, waiting for punishment. She stood straight, ready to accept whatever came. But the madam did not shout. She looked at the quiet maid, really looked at her for the first time. She saw exhaustion in her face, old sorrow in her eyes, and still, a strength that chose kindness over safety. This was not rebellion. This was courage, and it shook her. The madam turned away without a word, leaving the house in stunned silence. The maid stared at the quiet maid, their fear mixed with something new, hope. Because something had shifted, the madam's rage had caused harm. Her control had failed, and in that failure, compassion had stood stronger than power. The quiet maid had crossed a line no one ever dared to cross. Not with anger, not with defiance, but with humanity. And from that moment on, nothing in the house could return to how it was. After the incident, the house felt different. The silence was no longer sharp with fear. It was heavy with questions. The madam avoided the staff for the rest of the day. She stayed in her room, the door closed, her thoughts louder than any voice she had raised before. The image of the quiet maid kneeling on the floor would not leave her mind. Those steady hands, that fearless compassion. That night, sleep did not come, and neither did peace. The next morning, the madam called for the quiet maid. The message spread through the house like fire. The other maids froze in fear. Some believed punishment was coming. Some feared dismissal. A few prayed silently. No one dared speak hope out loud. The quiet maid walked toward the room calmly. But inside her chest, old wounds stirred. She had faced this moment many times in her life, standing before power, knowing truth often came with pain. Inside the room, the madam sat stiffly, her face unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the madam asked about her past. The question was sharp, sudden, and unexpected. The quiet maid lowered her eyes. Her hands tightened slightly. She had buried her story deep, where it could not hurt her anymore. But now was asking to be heard. Slowly, she began. She spoke of a life once filled with comfort and respect. A home where she was not a servant, but a daughter. A girl who believed in people, who trusted promises, who thought kindness was strength. Then came loss. Her family was destroyed by betrayal. Someone close had taken everything: money, safety, dignity, and walked away without regret. When she asked for help, doors closed. When she begged for justice, no one listened. She had fallen from security into survival, from respect into struggle. She spoke of working in houses where she was blamed, shouted at, and treated as less than human. Of nights spent crying quietly so no one could hear. Of learning to stay silent, not because she was weak, but because speaking had only brought more pain. As she spoke, the madam felt something tighten in her chest. The story sounded too familiar. The quiet maid looked up for the first time. Her eyes met the madam's, and in that moment, the truth became clear. They were not strangers. They were reflections. The madam remembered her own past, the betrayal she had never forgiven, the trust that had shattered her heart. She remembered how she had chosen power over pain, control over compassion. And now, sitting before her, was a woman who had walked the same road, but chosen a different ending. Where the madam had built walls, the maid had built patience. Where the madam had used fear, the maid had used empathy. The quiet maid finished her story without tears. Her voice remained steady, but her pain filled the room. "I stay," she said softly, "because I know what it feels like to be broken and unseen." That was the moment the madam broke. Not loudly, not with anger, but with realization. She saw her cruelty clearly for the first time, not as strength, but as fear wearing a crown. She saw the maids not as workers, but as wounded people carrying lives far heavier than their duties. And she saw herself, a woman who had been hurt and had chosen to hurt others instead of healing. The room felt smaller, closer, as the truth settled between them. The madam said nothing more. She did not need to. Her silence was no longer powerful. It was humbled. And as the quiet maid turned to leave, something had changed forever. The madam was no longer facing a servant. She was facing her past, and she could not look away anymore. The door closed softly behind the quiet maid, and for the first time in many years, the madam was alone with her thoughts. The room felt colder than before. The walls that once made her feel powerful now seemed to press in on her. She stood still, her hands clenched at her sides, her breath slow and uneven. The maid's story echoed in her mind. Every word felt like a mirror. The madam walked to the window and stared into the garden, but she did not see the trees or the flowers. She saw faces, maids who had stood where the quiet maid stood, women she had shouted at, women she had fired without care, women who had left this house with broken pride and heavy hearts. For years, she had told herself they were weak, that cruelty was necessary, that fear kept order. But now, those excuses sounded empty. Her strength began to crack. The madam lowered herself into a chair, her body heavy, her posture no longer proud. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together. She felt something rising inside her chest, something she had pushed away for a very long time. Guilt. It came quietly, then all at once. She remembered moments she had ignored before, tears she had dismissed, begging she had turned away from. She saw now how much harm she had caused, not just with her words, but with her silence and neglect. The house around her was silent. No footsteps rushed in fear. No voices whispered warnings. The silence felt different. It was not peaceful. It was heavy. The madam closed her eyes, and grief rose like a wave. Old memories flooded back. Her own betrayal, her own pain, the moment she decided never to feel weak again. She had built her life on control, believing it would protect her. Instead, it had turned her into someone she barely recognized. Tears welled in her eyes. She did not wipe them away. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had become. The anger she used as armor now felt like a burden. The power she had held so tightly slipped through her fingers, leaving behind shame. She thought of the quiet maid's calm courage, of kindness shown without demand, of strength that did not need to hurt others. And she understood something painful and true. She had been afraid all along, afraid to trust, afraid to forgive, afraid to face her own wounds. So she had made others afraid instead. The madam bowed her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. She did not cry loudly. There was no dramatic outburst, just quiet tears falling freely, carrying years of regret. Outside her room, the house remained still. The maid sensed it. Something had shifted. The fear that once filled the air was gone, replaced by uncertainty. They moved carefully, not because they were afraid, but because they did not know what this silence meant. Inside, the madam took a deep breath. For the first time, she did not want control. She wanted to make things right. The breakdown was complete. What came next would not be easy. Healing never is. But the reckoning had begun, and the house that once echoed with fear was now waiting to see if remorse could become change. The mornings in the house felt different now. The gates still opened. The marble floors still gleamed. But the air no longer carried the sharp edge of fear. Instead, it carried something fragile, new, a cautious sense of trust. The madam moved through the halls differently. She no longer walked with a rigid, commanding posture. Her steps were slower, more deliberate, as if she were learning a new way to exist in a world she had long ruled with fear. The maids noticed the change immediately. Orders were no longer shouted. Mistakes were corrected quietly, without public humiliation. Apologies were given when deserved. Small gestures, a warm cup of tea, a nod of thanks, replaced the cold silence that had defined the house for years. Yet, the quiet maid remained unchanged. She worked as she always had, steady and unassuming, never asking for recognition, never seeking praise. When the madam tried to thank her for the courage that had once shifted the course of the household, she shook her head gently. "I only did what any person should," she said softly. "No one is a hero for helping others." The madam watched her and felt a strange warmth, a mixture of admiration, guilt, and relief. She realized that redemption was not found in grand gestures or sudden acts of generosity. It was found in the small choices she made every day, treating someone fairly, listening without judgment, forgiving herself and others for past mistakes. She began visiting the maids in the kitchen and bedrooms, asking how they were, not what they had done wrong. She noticed fatigue in their eyes and pain in their hands, and began arranging the chores so that no one would be overworked. She remembered their stories of suffering outside these walls and started leaving care packages, medicine, food, small comforts, discreetly, without making a spectacle. It was slow. Not every day was perfect. Old habits of control flared occasionally, and she caught herself raising her voice or expecting obedience without explanation. But each time, she paused, breathed, and chose differently. Gradually, her presence no longer caused trembling or whispered fear. The quiet maid observed her silently, offering gentle support in her own subtle ways. A shared glance in the hall, a quiet word of encouragement. She did not seek to be praised. She only reminded the madam and the others that kindness was not weakness, it was survival. Weeks passed, and the house transformed. Where once there had been tension and dread, there was now laughter, quiet conversations, and moments of shared relief. Maid spoke freely, not in fear, but in trust. The madam's office, once a symbol of authority and terror, became a place of guidance and careful decisions. The madam finally understood that her power had never been in fear, it had always been in choice. And now, she chose differently. One evening, she paused at the top of the stairs, watching the maids finish their work. Their faces were calm, their movements were confident, and in the corner, the quiet maid worked as she always did, steady, humble, human. The madam felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. It was imperfect, slow, fragile, but it was real. The house, once a prison of fear and sorrow, had become a home of safety, respect, and gradual healing. And for the first time, the madam realized that redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about choosing a better way forward every single day. And in that choice, the house, and everyone in it, was reborn. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt cold. The madam walked through the halls slowly, noticing the subtle changes. The maids moved with confidence now, speaking without fear, carrying themselves with dignity that had been long denied. She paused outside the kitchen, watching Asha smile as she handed Mina a cup of tea. Small gestures of warmth, once impossible, now filled the spaces that had been silent with fear. Her eyes fell on the quiet maid, who worked as always, humble and focused. She did not seek recognition. She had never sought it. And yet, her presence had shifted everything. Her calm courage had pierced years of cruelty, showing that real strength could be gentle. The madam understood, finally, that power did not come from fear. True power came from choice, from the decision to act with kindness, to see the humanity in others, even when it was difficult. The lesson was clear, yet profound. Hearts hardened by pain could still be opened by compassion. The maids, once broken, now carried hope in their steps. They laughed softly in the corridors, shared stories, and began to reclaim the dignity the house had once stolen. Life was not perfect. Healing never is. But the shift was undeniable. A single act of courage, a quiet refusal to be intimidated, had changed everything. The madam paused by the window, looking out at the garden. She breathed deeply, letting go of years of anger, shame, and pride. One story, a simple act of humanity, had reminded her that change was always possible. Pain could harden hearts, but compassion could break them open. And in that broken open space, the house, the maids, and even the madam herself found a new beginning. A beginning where forgiveness, kindness, and hope could finally take root. The story had ended, but its impact would last forever.